Hello, and welcome to Tales of Dread. I've compiled some of the most mysterious, disturbing and terrifying cases of things in the national parks, from missing persons to paranormal phenomena, and eyewitness accounts. This is 2 hours of high strangeness within our own national parks, and Joy Trenton's story is a bit disturbing. So enjoy, but don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Back when Trenton was a teenager, his house backed onto a quiet private section that nearly bordered the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. He thinks technically they actually lived within the park's boundaries, but don't quote him on that 11th day when he was a teenager. Him and his brother went off on an adventure in the woods. They were armed with a few BB guns and some snacks. They didn't go too far into the woods, maybe a mile or so at most, and it took them a while to get there because they didn't have the right hiking boots and the brush was really thick, and it was hot and humid. So all they wore was jeans, small tennis shoes, and tank tops. Trenton says the terrain was pretty rough, and they had to climb over fallen trees and crawl under others. For the time being, it was a pretty fun adventure. And they remembered that they were walking along this creek bed when they came to a small clearing. They were sweaty, tired, and thirsty, so they decided to take a break. And in fact, in the center of this very clearing was a large rock that seemed to jut out of the ground maybe by about 4 feet high. This was a great place to sit, eat lunch, drink water, and get ready for the rest of the day's adventures. So while they were eating, Trenton's brother and both of them heard a strange humming sound coming from a machine. In fact, Trenton tells me that it reminded him at the time of somebody running a shop vac, except they're in the middle of the deep woods. There was no one around, but it sounded like it was coming from everywhere, not just one place. Far away, he remembers that his brother was also very confused by this and told him that he, too, could hear it. So, they looked around in confusion to see where the noise was coming from, but they couldn't find it. And as they look around, Trenton feels a knot start to form in his stomach, and all of a sudden he stops wanting to eat. And this overwhelming feeling of fear comes over him like a tidal wave that's about to hit a surfer. At this point, Trenton says he got lost in his own discomfort for a moment and felt sick, like he had the flu or a fever. It was so strange and happened so quickly, unlike anything he had ever seen or felt before. Then, both he and his brother heard what sounded like an explosion, but again, it didn't sound like it was coming from one place. Instead, it sounded like it was coming from everywhere at the same time, he said. It made him think of an explosion sound effect from a sci-fi movie. He also mentioned the sci-fi channel show Stargate SG, and the sound made him think of a sound effect or sound bite that would be used on that show because it didn't sound like a normal explosion. As he and his brother looked around for the source of the strange explosion, he noticed that his brother was nervously looking over his shoulder. He asked him what was wrong, and his brother told him that he thought he saw movement in his bushes to the right, which he didn't want because he thought it was a cougar trying to sneak up on them. So, both boys stop what they're doing and listen for a while. As they listen carefully for movement, they notice that the humming has stopped. All other sounds had stopped. Before, the forest was noisy with birds chirping and other sounds that come with being in a forest during the day. Now, the only thing they could hear was the wind, and that's when they saw something move in the bushes behind them instead of to the right. It was maybe 15 feet away. Both boys turned to see what it was, but all they could see was 2 very bright red eyes staring back at them. They seemed to glow for a moment, and when they turned around, the eyes were gone. They were scared and didn't want to do anything else that day. About 10 minutes into their walk or light jog, they quickly packed up their lunch and started walking in the direction of home. Both boys turned around quickly when they heard something coming up from behind them. It was a dark figure, they said. They thought it was a person, but it was all black and moving very quickly through the woods towards them. It was still too far away to see any details, but it was clearly walking on two legs toward them, and the way it moved was strange, like it glided through the trees and brush without making a sound, while they're stepping on things and making crunching noises and are pretty scared at this point. So, they stopped half jogging and started sprinting back home. They looked back a few times and saw that whatever it was catching up to them and getting closer. They didn't know how, but it was keeping up with them and getting closer the more they looked back. When they got back to their house, they ran through the yard, ran inside, and locked the door. They didn't want to tell their parents what had happened. Both boys looked out the back window and saw a dark, almost swaying figure standing in the woods. It was just standing there, swaying, and looking in the direction of the house. They watched it for a while, but it never moved or made a sound. After a while, neither of the boys could sit any longer. It had just turned into air by evaporating. After that, it's safe to say they never went back into those woods again. On March 17, 2012, a man named Derek Lukung disappeared without a trace in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. "Don't try to follow me," was written on a note that was left on Derek's car. This is an interesting part of his story. Many people already thought that this could be a suicide trip because he would probably just go into the woods and maybe fall off a cliff or do whatever else he had planned. But that didn't stop search and rescue workers as well as Derek's family and friends from looking for him. Park rangers and search workers knew it would be very hard to find Derek. At this point, no one had heard from Derek in a few days. When he went missing, Derek was about 24 years old and worked as an orderly at the Tennessee Peninsula Behavior Health Center. But Derek's disappearance is strange because he just stopped going to work one day, and this went on for a few days. This suggests that he may have killed himself. When his family found out, like any family would, they were very worried. They tried to get in touch with him, but he wouldn't answer the phone or call them back. The family thinks that all of this has to do with the fact that his grandfather, who he was very close to, has gone missing and is likely dead. And it just so happens that Derek went missing on the anniversary of his grandfather's death. This has led many of Derek's close friends and family to think that he probably dropped out because he couldn't handle the death of his grandfather, which is a very common thing for many people to do. At some point, Derek's family found out that he was actually staying at a hotel in North Carolina, but by the time they got there to find him, he had already left. As his family was driving back to Tennessee, they found his parked car on Newfound Gap Road and called the police right away. The area where he was parked is right where the Appalachian Trail crosses the Newfound Gap Road, which makes many people think that he just got out of his car and went on the trail, probably when police and other investigators started to search his car. They found a note that said, "Don't try to follow me," which again supports the original theory. But many people who work for Great Smoky Mountains National Park were not sure if the note was really Derek's or not. When they looked in Derek's car, they found his wallet full of credit cards, his ID card, and his driver's license. As well as a map of the park that shows everything, sleeping bags, tents, and other supplies. Even stranger is that all of the things he had with him were things he had just bought, which suggests he was going to use them for something like hiking or going on a trip. So it doesn't make sense for him to go buy these things and then leave and opt out. So, even though it's a popular idea, there might be something else going on. At this point, questions started coming up left and right. Had he just walked into the woods in late winter without any gear to help him? And if that's the case, why did he do that? Or could there have been another reason? Another reason that could have been more sinister and hard to explain is that he may have been tricked, scared, or even forced to leave his car. We will never know. In fact, This story had gotten so much attention from national media that one of Derek's friends had gone on to talk to CNN and told them that Derek loved the Bear Grylls show Man vs. Wild. Because of this, he could have easily gone on an adventure to show everyone he could do it, clear his head, and try to find some peace in the wild. Even his friend said that Derek wasn't new to the wilderness. He had all the equipment and supplies and knowledge he would need to survive a trek out in the woods. So this only made his case much more perplexing. Now, park rangers weren't sure if the gear he had would have been good for the track he was trying to do, if he was even trying to do a track. And as a matter of fact, many of the park rangers working on Derek's case were not at all convinced that the equipment Derek had supposedly brought with him would suffice, and 500,000 acres of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, 60 separate searchers and 3 separate dog teams, scoured the woods looking for Derek, searching over 70 miles worth of trails and woods near where his car was found. Not being able to find anything, and they really pushed the limits of how far they were going to search. They were rappelling down the sides of cliffs and looking for Derek in any cracks or nooks and crannies they could find, but they couldn't find him anywhere. Hikers on the Appalachian Trail soon spread the news like wildfire to anyone who would listen, and who was passing through the area and hoping to find Derek somewhere. But despite the presence of many people going in and out of the park, especially during this time of the year where it was beautiful and lots of sunshine, no one had seen Derek anywhere all throughout the Smoky Mountain. And it wasn't long before people began considering the fact that he had most likely gone off the trail. Whether or not he did that on purpose or not, it would probably be much harder to try to find him. And by March 23, there was still no sign of Derek anywhere except for his car, the note, and the things he had with him. At this point, the search was broken up into smaller groups, so that people could try to stay in more populated areas in the hopes of finding something. What makes this case even more interesting is that Michael Cudaciini, a different man from Derek, went missing in the Great Smoky Mountains near Newfound Gap on March 18, just days after Derek went missing. He was also from Nashville, Tennessee, and was about 23 years old. And what's strange about him is that he was last seen Sunday afternoon outside of a Walmart. And like Derek, a search party of park rangers and other search rescue personnel was made up to try and find any trace of this other man, but like Derek, nothing turned up. Unlike Derek's case. But Michael wasn't a huge fan of the outdoors, and he wasn't a hiker or someone who was excited to go to the Smoky Mountains. So it's hard to understand why he went out there. If we go to the future quickly. On August 21, 2012, searchers did find a few things that they thought Michael had carried with him the last time they saw him. They thought they belonged to him, and they were not too far from the other things they found. The 6th of September, 2012. A close examination of the remains found by the County Medical Examiner's Office in the Knoxville region came to the conclusion that, yes, these are indeed Michael Cudaciini's remains. The strange thing about this is that his body parts were only found about 3/10 of a mile from where his car was found in March. At this point, they had already found Michael Cudaciini's body parts, but Derek was still missing. Even though they didn't know for sure how Michael Cudaciini had died, many people thought that he had killed himself out there, and that was the main reason he had gone out there to be alone, to end his life. And when the last page of one book is turned, we still don't know what happened to Derek. In fact, his missing persons case is still open because, according to the National System for Missing and Unidentified People, Derek just walked off into the woods and never came back. He has been missing for more than 10 years at this point. Is it possible that he set off to end his life, or did something else more nefarious happen to him? Did he get spooked and run and fall off a cliff and somehow injure himself, and was left to die? Or was the note in his car really his, and he left to take care of his own business because he couldn't deal with the death of his close grandfather? I'll let you guys decide what happened on June 5, 2014, when a woman working at the Wild's front desk was attacked. A woman at an interpretive center in Dahlonega, Georgia, about 30 miles northeast of the southern end of the Appalachian Trail at Springer Mountain, said she saw an older man walk in and put his keys on the counter. He then walked up to the counter and gave her $200 and asked her to keep an eye on his car, which was parked right outside the center. He then told her he would be gone for the next 6 months and planned to hike all the way to Baxter State Park in Maine. The woman said she didn't mind, and the man left. Strangely, other hikers said that a backpack and some gear had been left in the middle of the trail, only about a quarter mile from the center, only a few days earlier. After the Ute County Sheriff's deputies found the backpack, they found the idea of the hiker inside. It was the same man who had been in the visitor center just days before. His name was Paul Deep, and he was a 50-year-old construction worker from Alice, Wisconsin. The story goes that he quit his job 7 days earlier, took $5,000 out of his personal bank account, and told his girlfriend he was going to hike the trail. That was the last time anyone saw him or knew where he was going. His girlfriend was very worried about this, so she called the sheriff's office and told them that her boyfriend had a lot of mental health problems and a lot of physical problems, like high blood pressure, and had just been diagnosed as schizophrenic. In March 2014, Paul had already tried to kill himself, and his girlfriend was worried that he might try to do it again. At that point, the sheriff's deputies put all the pieces together and realized that he was definitely going to go do this. It's possible that Paul's backpack was just a way to trick and deceive the people at the center into thinking he was going to hike up the trail when, in reality, he was just going to throw it away at the end. After all, it had all of his gear, including his clothes, GoPro, GPS, food, tent, sleeping bag, and $3,000, which is everything you need to survive. Stranger still, several other hikers saw a man who fit Paul's description, but he was hiking in a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops and using a trash bag as a sleeping bag. So it's clear that he wasn't trying to kill himself, but he might have been severely mentally ill, and no one knows what he was doing after the sheriff's office checked Paul's cell phone to try to find out where he was last seen. It hurt in Cleveland, Ohio, to find out that Paul had turned off his phone just days before he got to Dahlonega. However, it became clearer and clearer that his only goal was not to kill himself, as he was seen multiple times on June 7th and June 8th, both in Georgia, on Deep Gap. Then, on June 17th, he was seen climbing up the Western Ball in the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. But Paul's story gets a lot more interesting when it turns out that on June 10th, he spent the night at the Standing Indian Shelter in North Carolina with a camper. This hiker said that Paul had spent the whole night reading the Bible's New Testament and talking a lot about God, Christianity, and religion in general. And it's possible that Paul perhaps was out on the Appalachian Trail, was seeking some sort of spiritual adventure. But those are just his visitors. Paul's brother says that Paul likes to hunt and fish a lot. He loved being outside. He had a lot of experience and knew a lot about that area in Wisconsin. So it's possible he wanted to leave his old life behind and find peace in the wilderness by himself with very little. And I find it very strange that while Paul was at Western Bald, he accepted at least a week's worth of food from other hikers who were worried about him after seeing how little gear he was carrying and how he was dressed. So, as people started to see him, the story started to change. It was a big blow to the idea that he was out there to get himself out. It's possible that Paul wanted to push himself to the limit by going into the most dangerous conditions he could with the fewest gears he could. And it's too bad that nobody knows what happened to Paul after a while. It could happen. He still doesn't know if the trail he lost doesn't want to be found. If you liked today's video, make sure to click the like button and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about the video from today. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that big red subscribe button, as it really helps this channel. As always, guys, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the next video. In and around 2014, Jeremy Foyer worked as a park ranger in Mount Rainier National Park. He lived in the park, but most of the time he stayed at the Sunrise Visitor Center on the weekends. At the time this story takes place, it was around 3:30 in the morning, and Jeremy was driving up a rocky mountain road in a thick fog. His headlights were just bright enough to let him see where he was going. Now, there wasn't much moonlight that night, and there was a lot to see around him, so he was driving slowly and holding onto the wheel, doing his best to get through this road. Like most other stories, as he came around a bend in the mountain road, he saw something that scared him. At first, he thinks it's a person because it didn't look like an animal when it was on all fours, but rather when it was standing up. As he starts to slow down, he's probably going about 20 miles per hour. He sees this figure stop and move right up to the edge of the road. At the same time, he's coming around this bend, so he could see a figure in the dim light. However, as soon as his headlights came around the bend and started to shine and partially illuminate this figure, he knew it wasn't a person at all, but rather an animal or creature of some kind, and it was one that walked on two legs. Now, he said that the creature he saw was no taller than a man, maybe between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 11 inches, since he's 5 feet 8 inches, and said it was about the same height as him. He also said that it looked like a person, except that it was very hairy and had a head like a German shepherd or a timber wolf. When it got to the edge of the road, it stopped, turned its head, and looked right into his eyes. He knew right away that it wasn't someone dressed as a werewolf coming down the mountain. This looked way too real, and he could see the muscles rippling under its chest and body. Also, the fur and skin around the chest and biceps were very thin, so you could see muscle definition. You could see its chest contract and expand as it breathed, even seeing its hot breath in the cold night air, and its eyes were glowing this ambush yellow color and looking right at him. As he stared at this thing, his eyes kind of slowly blinked. They just had long claws that were 34 inches long. But he said that if there was ever a real werewolf, this was it. He knows it's silly to say that something looks like a made-up animal, but he's sure that's what it was, or at least that's what he thinks it was. Just as he's about to look away, the thing starts to move forward into his headlights, coming right at his car. Now, as this is happening, his mouth is still open in shock, and Jeremy looks and sees that, unlike a dog, which has hawks, this thing has legs like a man, with bent knees, big ankles, and big feet. And this thing is just walking right up to his car like nothing is wrong. At this point, Jeremy doesn't know what to do. Not only is he confused, but he's also very scared. As soon as he looks down to put the car in reverse, he feels something hit the car. When he looks up, he sees that the thing has moved the short distance in a second and is now pressing down on the hood of the car while never taking its eyes off of Jeremy. Jeremy thinks this means that it was trying to be the alpha, the leader, or that it was trying to scare him. It was telling him, "No, you're in my territory, and you should respect it." When Jeremy took his foot off the brake pedal and slowly put it on the gas, his car started to drift down. When he put it in reverse and tried to speed up to get away from whatever it was, it just stood there, and its headlights moved further and further back, but it didn't move. Eventually, the fog made it impossible to see it at all. As he drove away in reverse, Jeremy started to cry and break down because he was scared and didn't know how to defeat such a strange and scary creature. So, after a few seconds, he comes back to himself and realizes that this thing could still be coming toward his car in the fog. He has no choice but to do what he has to do. He can't just drive backwards all the way down this road. Instead, he has to put his car in drive and drive a little faster, hoping he won't run into the thing he last saw standing in the middle of the road in his way. So, he puts his car in drive and hopes for the best. He drives a little faster this time, and within a couple of 100 yards, he arrives at the exact spot where he had seen the wolf-like creature, So he doesn't even bother to look around to see what's going on. He just wants to get off this dirt road so he can go home. Lucky for Jeremy, nothing bad happens on the way. But now that he's past this point and is relieved that it's over, he sees something in his rearview mirror. As he drives, hoping to see the fog clear up a bit so he can get down to the road, he sees something come out of the fog and run toward his car. But now that he's on all fours, Jeremy is very scared by what he sees in his rearview mirror. He decides to speed up even more, and after a short distance, he's able to get through the fog because it starts to clear up as he goes down a hill. This chase only lasted about 45 seconds. It never caught up to his car, but it got very close. Suddenly, this thing disappeared into the fog, and now that he's at a low enough altitude, he can't see it anymore. Jeremy was lucky that he was able to get home safely without anything following him or anything else being seen. At the end of 2014, Jeremy would move to Pennsylvania, where he would keep working as a park ranger for the Forest Service. Since that night, Jeremy Foyer hasn't met anyone else in the same situation. In August 2011, Dylan was working as a seasonal park ranger at the Deep Creek campground in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He sent in this first story. Around midnight, he left to drive back to his house at the park on the other side. He had taken this route many times before, and on this night, it was usually very dark with only a few lights on. But the moon was out and very full, which made it easier for him to see than usual as he drove down Deep Creek Road, which leads south to Bryson City. Something caught his eye up ahead, near some trees and an old picnic table that had been taken away because it was old and rotting. Dylan first thought it might be a bear because there are black bears all over the South, but then he saw how strange it looked compared to a normal black bear, especially when it stood up like this one did. He thought it was about 7 to 8 feet tall and had long, flowing black hair all over its body except for its face, which looked more human than anything else. From where he was standing and how bright it was hard to tell, but its arms were not as big as you would expect for an animal this size. Instead, they were thin and long, with long, bony fingers. Dylan only saw it for about 10 seconds as he drove on, but that was enough to give him a creepy feeling in the pit of his stomach and make him wonder what he had just seen. When he got home, he told his wife about what had happened, and at first, as usual, she didn't believe him until he told her more about what he had seen. She didn't say Bigfoot or Sasquatch because she doesn't know much about those things. Dylan had a hard time accepting and making sense of this for a long time, until he was able to talk to other people who worked in the park who had seen similar things. One of the staff members, who he got to know well while they worked together, told him about some ghosts she had seen while she was working in the park. Dylan realized from this that there are probably more of these kinds of animals in this area than he had ever thought. Since then, he has become a believer and is sure that whatever he saw was probably some kind of Sasquatch. Now, his co-worker had told him that the first time she had seen a Bigfoot-like creature was in 1997 in the Deep Creek area. She had seen a large two-legged creature move across the road in front of her car. Since then, she has seen it more than once in the park and on nearby roads while she was driving. Both areas are very close to each other, as is the spot where Dylan saw the creature. This makes them even more sure that this is a hot spot for these creatures in the area. However, the creature Dylan saw was not as big and bulky as the one his co-worker had seen. Instead, it was taller and thinner. She said it looked more like an ape, while the one he had seen, which was thinner and smaller, looked more human. Dylan and his co-worker have both seen lots of black bears in the area before. Dylan describes not hearing any sounds as this thing moved across the road in front of him, but also described that the engine kind of drowned out any other noise along with the radio, but said that this putrid odor filled up the cabin of his vehicle. Dylan said it smelled like rotting meat and urine, and his co-worker had a similar experience in 2005 when she was driving down a similar road in the summer and saw something similar. In the early evening, she saw a large creature standing on its hind legs next to the road near a tree. It looked like the creature she had seen before and what Dylan had seen standing up. She said that this one was about 8 feet high, gray, with a big head, shoulders, and arms but almost no neck. She said that this one was much bigger than the first one and that, based on its shape and size, she thinks the first one she saw was a woman. The way its muscles were defined and the way its body was shaped showed that it was a male. Unlike the first time they met, this one seemed to act aggressively toward her, and she said it even took a few steps toward her car as if it was getting ready to do a bluff charge. She said it was very intense, very scary, and very aggressive. Since then, Dylan has heard of other sightings in and around the area, but he can't think of any right now. There are also reservations for Native American tribes not too far away. They have also said that they have seen them in that area. And every tribe has its own stories. They might even be the best people to talk to about stories like this one. So, what's your opinion? Did Dylan and his co-worker really see something from another world, or did they all just mistake a black bear for something else? I'll let you decide. Kevin tells us the next story. Now, before he talked about his own encounter with the unknown, he didn't want his name to be known. So let's call him Kevin. Worked as a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park during the spring and summer of 2015, when the story took place. If you don't know much about this park, you should know that it is a very large area with many different sections. It is a beautiful park with many different kinds of trees, plants, and animals. And Kevin had worked in one of these smaller sections right near Cades Cove. In fact, it's a very popular place for tourists and hikers, and he worked in the visitor center, which is on a small mountain road. There are many hiking trails in the area, and there are a lot of cabins and campgrounds. With thick trees, shrubs, and bushes, the area can also be quiet and out of the way. There are a lot of small roads that end or lead to small cabins that are hard to find. Kevin says that the area is very beautiful, but it also has a dark side. Not a lot of people know. There are a lot of black bears and other animals there, and it's not unusual for hikers or tourists to run into big black bears. However, most people just ignore them. He has also heard stories about strange creatures from other park rangers and visitors. But what he saw this spring evening was not a bear. He still can't figure out what it was. He was working the slowest shift, which is in the evening. It's a good time to sit back, listen to music, and look at the trees and mountains. One of his favorite times to work was in the evening because it was so peaceful and quiet. On this particular night, he had decided to take a walk down one of the smaller roads to clear his mind, listening to the sounds of the nightlife while taking in the fresh air and sights around him. Kevin always felt at peace when he was walking down the road and taking in everything around him at these times. He was enjoying his peaceful walk when he heard a loud growling sound coming from the bushes next to him. He stops and looks around, but he can't see what's making the noise. But from what he heard, it seemed big enough to eat him whole, he says. So, he slowly moved away from the bushes while keeping an eye on them. As he did this, something flew out of the bushes and landed near a tree. From what he could see, it looked like a huge bat of some kind. But when it got up on the branch, it looked down at him with ugly glowing eyes and a beak for a face. He had never been so filled with evil before. He says this thing wasn't from this world. Kevin says it was about 5 feet tall, covered in dark brown, matted fur, and had wings that were about 8 to 10 feet wide. With its long, curved beak, the face looked like that of a bat or pterosaur, but it was much more evil. It had yellow glowing eyes and a horrible beak for a mouth. It just sat there and looked at him with an evil grin. Kevin, who was surprised and didn't know what to do next. He moves slowly away from the thing while keeping his eyes on it. It was as if something was taunting it to come closer. He doesn't know how long this situation lasted because time stops when you're in the middle of it. But once he had gotten far enough away from this creature, it just disappeared into the trees and was gone. Once he knows it's safe, he runs back to the visitor center, trying as hard as he can to keep a professional attitude. His co-workers laugh at him and think he's crazy when he tells them what happened. He still doesn't know what was out there or where it came from. It was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to him, and he will never forget it. Since then, he has tried to do research during his free time, but he hasn't been able to figure out what this could be because there are so many different kinds of bats in Tennessee. But the bat he saw wasn't like any other bat. This thing was easily the size of a small child, maybe 8 or 10 years old. I mean, he's talking about something huge, maybe even as big as a condor, but this wasn't a condor. From what he said, this thing looks like a pterosaur from hell more than anything else. In fact, the only thing that was bat-like about it was its wings and how they appeared to be all tattered and leathery. He said that he has seen many bats in his life, so he knows what they look like. But it wasn't a bat. Even if Canada's Nabarni National Park Reserve didn't have a great reputation for mysteries, it would still be a great place to fish because it is right next to Alaska and the Northwest Territories. The park is almost 12,000 square miles big, and it has a whitewater river that runs through canyons that are up to 3,300 feet deep. Nabarni National Park Reserve was the first UNESCO World Heritage Site because it has thick, forest, and beautiful waterfalls like Angel Falls, which is twice as high as Niagara Falls. Even though the Hani Valley is beautiful, it only gets about 1,000 visitors a year, which is less than many parks get in a single day. Due to its remote location, the valley is almost completely untouched. No Hani can only be reached by air or water, so tourists who want to go there must either charter a small float plane or bush plane or bravely travel down the South Nabarni River. On top of all this, the park has been linked to an alarming number of strange events in the past. It was a national park where explorers often went to find the new Hani valleys, which were said to have gold deposits, but their bodies were never found. When the bodies were finally found, they were often cut up or even beheaded, giving the Hani the infamous name Valley of the Headless Men or Headless Valley. Even if someone is lucky enough to make it out alive, they might come out mad or crazy. Others didn't lose their minds, but they told crazy stories about animals that were twice as big as anywhere else, with monsters like hairy giants, evil spirits, and living fossils like dinosaurs, woolly mammoths, and dire wolves that lived in a magical land that time had forgotten. Even though Nabarni National Park Reserve is safer now than it was in the past because of modern conveniences, the same stories keep coming up. Many of the beliefs we have about the valley came from the dead people who lived there about 10,000 years ago. We know that Hani was very important to the dead people because they told us so. One of the more than 20 tribes in the area, the Deko, also known as the Slave E, would leave simple gifts like tobacco by the hot springs in the Hani Valley. They did this to bring good luck and appease the spirits of the land. Because of this sacred nature, Nabarni still keeps a secret about its quality. Many parts of the park are still strictly off-limits to the public. Documentary filmmakers who want to film on the river sometimes have to wait for long periods of time for permission from the authorities. No one argues that the restricted access to the new Hani Valley isn't because of its cultural and environmental importance, but because strange things happen here. We can't help but wonder if the Klondike Gold Rush in the late 1800s didn't have something else to do with it. About 100,000 people came to the north of Canada looking for money and fame. It was a mad rush with less and less to show for it. One or more. Only about 40,000 people made it to their destination, and only about half of them tried to find gold. Of the 4,000 people who did find gold, only a few hundred became rich. Some prospectors went to the Nabarni Valley because of this craze, and when they came back, they told the craziest stories. One of the first modern myths about the valley says that somewhere inside its borders is a lush tropical paradise that never gets snow or cold and is always too warm, even in the winter. People told stories about this Canadian Shangri-La because its water came from hot springs. Somewhere in the high mountain pass, this Yukon jungle allegedly held miraculous flora and fauna unlike anywhere else in the region or on Earth. Palm trees popped up from the permafrost, 60-feet vines spiraled to the heavens, ferns and nettles stood taller than any man, and rose bushes supported stems as thick as forearms. Mountain sheep, moose, and caribou live so well there that they are almost too fat. Even though there was a lot of food there, local tribes were said to avoid the area at all costs because of huge three-toed prints all over the tropical valley. Maybe a relic from a long time ago. The tropical valley of Nohani has never been found, and most people now think that these stories came from the area's many hot springs, some of which do heat the soil enough to make it grow lush vegetation. Even though the tropical valley seems made up, it's not. Megafauna are much better documented. Woolly mammoth and mastodon bones are all over the northernmost parts of North America, and native art from the Hani Valley often shows the animals in a very accurate way. Elephant bones, on the other hand, don't tell us much about what the animals look like. For example, their schools don't make it clear where their trunks are. So, we don't know how the people of the tribes knew what woolly mammoths looked like. Maybe their ancestors who hunted woolly mammoths told them stories about them over many generations, or maybe they have seen them for themselves. Some tribes claim that large creatures resembling mammoths still lumber through Canada today. Explorers to the Northern Territories also told of similar tales because in 1887 fur trader Colef Fowler said that a tribal chief had handed him a large ivory tusk, too large to belong to a walrus, with obvious signs of fresh flesh and blood. The chief claimed it had been killed only 3 months prior and even drew a picture of an elephant in the dirt, if not mammoths. Then another prehistoric survival might exist in the valley. A tribal informant had told cryptozoologist Ivan T. /S. Anderson that the apex predator of the Nohani was a lion, not a puma or a cougar, but an actual Maine lion and bigger than any other specimen on Earth. Some cryptozoologists think that the Nabani lion could be a remnant population of saber-toothed cats or even the American lion, a species that lived from Alaska to Mexico about 11,000 years ago. Like the ones that were said to live near Hani, the American lion was 25% bigger than the ones that live today. A lion would have no chance against a dinosaur. A native guide in Ahani told scientists that a Creek person had wandered into the valley a long time ago. From what he said, the wanderer ran into a primitive tribe around a fire. They were armed with bone-shot javelins and clubs made from the jawbones of the moon. People from the Stone Age told stories about a scary place called Medicine Valley to the north, where huge, dangerous monsters lived. As proof, they gave the wanderer a piece of burnt buckskin with a picture of the animal and its tail at this point. The guide showed the scientist the piece of paper, which had a clear drawing of a dinosaur that was accurate in every way. Even if these fossils that are still alive are just stories. According to reputable sources, some animals in Hani grow much bigger than anywhere else. In 1970, a moose from the valley was caught on film with a set of antlers that were about 12 feet long, which was twice the average size. In Ahani, grizzlies have been seen that are the size of a young moose and stand a dozen feet tall on their hind legs. In contrast, the largest Kodiak bears rarely grow to be more than 10 feet tall. One person who saw a bear there in the 1970s said it was as big as an Abrams tank. In the same decade, John and Joanne Moore saw a small black bear in Ahani. After watching it for a while, they realized it was a big porcupine because it was acting strangely. The Moores were not likely to have made up what they saw or gotten it wrong. After all, they had been on many adventures before. In fact, Moore's Hot Springs and Ahani National Park Reserve are named after the two. In addition to the DNA, there was also a secretive tribe that called the Hani Valley home. Both the tribe and the valley were called Hani. Most people think that the word No Hani, which is used to describe the area today, refers to these people, but no one can agree on what the name of the tribe means. One of the first things people said about Ni Hani was that it meant mountain people or people from a long way away. It may also be a corrupted form of the word No Hanikia, an indigenous term signifying the people who speak like ducks, perhaps referencing how the No Hani language differed from that of the DNA given the prefix Na, and the fear with which the DNA described them. Nabani may roughly be translated as hostile or enemy. Details on the mysterious No Hani people are sparse. Other than that, they really did exist in some way. Anthropologists still argue about whether the Hani people were their own tribe or just a small part of a larger one. Because they wore clothes made of sheepskin, other tribes sometimes called them sheepmen. Others, like the Deco, were afraid of them and told stories about how big they were. Even giants. This is another possible way the name Nabani Tahiti got started. The Nabani River is also called the River of Giants. When the Ni Hani went out into the world, this scary reputation went with them. Canadian explorers heard that the people of the New Hani Valley, if they were ever seen, were very hostile to strangers and would defend their land at any cost before running away into the mountains. But what we know about history shows that this is not true. Early settlers, including those from the famous Hudson's Bay Company, said that the Ni Hani were wary but friendly to visitors. Their people were both smart and resourceful. Unfortunately, these meetings didn't happen very often. And their last contact with the outside world happened in 1929. That was the same year that a flu epidemic hit the area, and the few people who didn't die were taken in by other tribes. Hani's tendency to keep to himself, and his disappearance after that gave them an air of mystery. There were rumors that the tribe was led by a matriarch, a white queen with European roots whose presence made people think of the fairy queen ruling over her people. This probably started when someone misread a report from 1838 about a fair-skinned woman in charge of the New Hani. It still shows how myths have grown up around the tribe over time. Was it the flu or a curse that killed off the No Hani? Explorers found that anyone who spent the night in the ruins of Nabani settlements got a mysterious, highly contagious disease. In a legend, this might have been blamed on the Soni, who was said to be the most feared of all great spirits and spread disease with the help of demons who lived in the No Hani Valley. Sonita is not the only dangerous thing in this place. An indigenous belief. The whole area has ghosts. Some spirits were helpful, but most were dangerous. Lesser powers lived in every animal, plant, rock, and landmark in the valley, and they could do a lot of damage to anyone who messed with their environment. Many DNA hunters were led into Nabani and never came back. Bad medicine. Others found that the tracks of the animals they were looking for just stopped, as if the animals had vanished into thin air or been eaten by the earth. Many people still believe that these ghosts and the curses they put on the Nabani Valley are the reason why so many people have died or gone missing there. The caves along the South Nabani River are home to a well-known spirit. Tribal legends say that it can make people vanish like smoke in the wind. Its hideous wails can be heard drifting on the breeze at night. While on an expedition to No Hani, journalist Pierre Burton experienced this sound firsthand. He described a low howling wind that swept out of the mountain down into the valley, died and rose again in greater intensity. When we heard the banshee wail, our hair stood on end, because this was definitely the sound that men talked and whispered about when this sound wasn't heard. Henderson said in the 1940s that there is no way to deny that the whole valley has a sinister feel to it. Nabani Frank has a heavy air about it. Depending on the story, the creepy landmarks in the park, like the many caves and thin rock spires called hoodoos, either housed these spirits or were made by them. These spirits sometimes make it clear who they are. In July 2010, Anthony Roche, an Indigenous Parks Canada worker, was getting ready for winter and a honey by clearing trails and gathering firewood for the warden's cabin. At the time, visitors were not allowed in this part of the park because of the forest fires. He made friends with two other workers, Bob and Amy, who eventually came to stay with him at the cabin. Anthony and Bob fell asleep in their bunk beds while Amy washed dishes in the kitchen. After a while, Anthony heard her stop. The cabin went quiet, and a short time later, Anthony heard what he thought was Amy walking from the kitchen into the bunk room. Anthony thought that Amy wanted him to finish the dishes because she tapped him on the heel. He fell asleep, but a light shake on the shoulder briefly woke him up again. At last, angry footsteps stomped back into the bunk room, waking Anthony up with a jolt. Before he opened his eyes, he heard footsteps running out of the room, but when he looked, there was no one there. Anthony went to the outhouse, and when he came back to the cabin, he found Amy sleeping on the couch. When he woke her up, she denied going into the bunk room. Bob said he had been sleeping the whole time, even if he was lying. Bob was on the top bunk, so there was no way he could have climbed down without Anthony noticing. A month later, Anthony was filming a promotional video for No Honey with a student and some other co-workers. At one point, a strange sound from the forest scared them. It sounded like a raven, but it was definitely a person making a raven sound. Tourists were still not allowed in the area, so Anthony asked one of the more experienced park workers. His friend only answered in a mysterious way. "He just wants us to know that he is there." The wind picked up quickly, and this time it carried the clear sound of a woman singing. Anthony's co-workers couldn't figure out what was going on. Aside from that, everyone agreed that it sounded just like singing. What would have happened if this singing ghost had tried to talk to the park workers? They might have gone crazy. There are many stories of people going crazy after coming out of the Hanival, and the historical record backs up more recent stories. For example, bush pilots who went to check on 5 prospectors in 1960 found 2 of them dead and told the pilots what they had seen. They put the pieces together. The prospectors were running out of flowers. And since there were dead moose and caribou, it was clear that they were hunting big game in the park. They did not dress the animals, though. Instead, they just left them in the field. Instead, the men killed and ate their own dogs, sometimes waiting until they were so rotten that their skin fell off at the slightest touch. Another prospector ate a caribou's guts but let the rest of the meat rot in the sun, which shows how desperate and crazy they were. One of the men uses the last of their dynamite to kill himself in the middle of the forest. When they heard about this tragedy, 2 prospectors went to get help, but they never came back. This left the last 2 survivors to sit in their cabin and get drunk. A prospector named Joe, who lived in a simple log cabin in Ahani in 1914 and was looking for a missing person in the valley when he was found, was another unfortunate victim of Nohani's madness. His face was badly scratched and his eye was swollen shut. They asked Joe if he and his prospecting partner Red had been fighting. Joe mumbled something about being left alone and fighting blue devils in the mountains, which he had now trapped in a box. Joe ran back to his cabin, got a small wooden box, and told the people who came to help him to follow him into the woods. They did it reluctantly, but after a while they started to worry that the box was full of gunpowder. The other guys jumped on Joe. They were relieved to see that the only things in the box were matches and baking powder. After a short struggle, Joe's face lit up as he finally realized that he had met his guests before. They took him back to the cabin, and hid his knives and bandaged his wounds, which they said he got from falling. Shortly after that, they found Red in the woods. He had run away from Joe because he was crazy. Over the next few weeks, Joe seemed to settle down, and the two of them went prospecting again. But he eventually started making up strange rituals and ended up building an altar for sacrifices on top of a mountain. This was the last thing Red could take, so he took Joe back to civilization to get medical care that didn't involve evil spirits. The curse is said to be even worse. Nohani, according to legend, the best way to stay safe in the valley is to leave the ground alone. Anyone who takes minerals out of the ground, especially gold, dies too soon. There does seem to be some truth to this rule. There are many examples of this in the Nabani Valley, but you can also find similar taboos all over the world. For example, people who go to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park are strongly told not to take any rocks from the park. People believe that taking these kinds of things out of US national parks not only breaks the law, but also angers Hawaii's volcano god Pele. Each year, tourists trying to change their bad luck sent back hundreds of packages to volcanoes national parks. Each package contained sand and rocks from the site. Pale are like obsidian, but whatever is in the Northwest Territories seems to want gold and won't let it go. The fact that the prospectors who died in Ahani Valley are the source of its biggest mystery is a clue. A line of bodies without heads that goes back through the years. Prospectors were very interested in Nabani after a DNA tribesman named Little No told them about it in 1900. Hani took a piece of quartz from the valley and brought it to town. It had a lot of gold in it. Now, one story says that the local tribes tried to keep the gold in the valley a secret, but Little Nabani changed everything when a second DNA brought more gold from the river. 4 years later, there were so many prospectors in the Nabani Valley that the flood had slowed down to a trickle. By the time they left in 1908, Willie and Frank McLeod were already on their way. From what everyone says, Willie was the perfect frontiersman. He could live off the land and track game better than anyone else. Willie filled a whole box with samples of gold when he first found it in Ahani in 1905, but he lost them all when they fell into the river. He didn't let that stop him, so he went back and was able to pan 10 ounces of nuggets. Soon after, he recruited his brother Frank and a young engineer from Scotland named Wer. After that, no one saw any of them alive again, just like in so many other stories from the time. The rest of the MacLeod story is hard to figure out because different newspaper stories give different details. Most people agree that about 2 to 3 years after Willie and Frank went missing, their brother Charlie set out to find them. He found them in the end along the river and in a place in Hanny called Dead Man's Valley. Both of them had been killed, and their heads were either missing or still on their bodies, depending on the story. It looked like the MacLeod brothers were killed while they slept. One arm of a skeleton was still outstretched, reaching for a rusty gun. Resting against a spruce tree, Charlie found his brother's belongings and used them to identify his body as well as a scribbled note in their hand said, "We have found a good prospect." Sure enough, a beautiful pile of gold-bearing quartz was sitting in a box nearby, untouched. Who would kill them and take all this money? Where was definitely a clue. But the first story said that he was never found. Now, many years later, Charlie would say that he found and talked to who? Just for him to kill himself. Now, 9 years after the MacLeod expedition, another prospector named Martin Jorgensen found gold. Hanny also found gold, so he sent a message to his friend Poole Field, who went to find Jorgensen. Poole met the crazy prospector along the way. Joe Poole finally made it across the divide, but he was shocked to see that Jorgensen's cabin had been burned down. Jorgensen's headless body was found nearby. This kind of murder would happen again and again over the next few decades. In 1945, a young boy in Ontario was found with his head cut off in a sleeping bag. Who or what is to blame for these cuts? Over the years, many theories have been put forward, but the official answer is that an animal that eats garbage is taking these heads. Some people think that the No-Hanny people were big headhunters, which is another reason why they were blamed for MacLeod's death. No one knows if this is true or not, but there is some evidence that tribes along the west coast of Alaska may have gone headhunting. But most of the other tribes in the area were mostly peaceful. For those that weren't there, most mutilations involved scalping, not decapitation, whether animals or people were to blame. Some people thought that the Headless Valley was caused by something that was neither an animal nor a person. The word giants comes up a lot when people talk about the Nabani Valley, which is how it got its name. They are part of the oldest stories about the area, as shown by the fact that the Decodine thought the New Hanny tribespeople were tall and dangerous. These stories mixed with those about the Naha, a different tribe. So much so that many people think the Naha and the No-Hanny people were the same. Other tribes, on the other hand, thought that the Naha were much more primitive than the No-Hanny. Even better, they are said to have lived on into the modern era. While we know about the New Hanny tribe from our own experiences with them, one way of thinking is that the Naha didn't die out, but instead moved far to the south, into what is now the United States, where they became the Navajo people. People think that the Navajo tribe moved from northwest Canada to the southwest of the United States a long time ago. To make things even more confusing, Stories about giant headhunters called the PNA Connie were mixed up with stories about the Hani tribe and the Naha. Now, legend has it that the knock on the door lurk just beyond the light of the campfire. They leave strange footprints in the forest, make scary noises at night, and torture their victims by throwing sticks and stones at them. Their eyes are red, their arms are strong, and they have hair that smells bad all over. They can't be hurt by guns or knives. One author said that they enjoyed killing everything they could reach by cutting off their heads. The DNA were always afraid of the Nagorni. Emile Petito, a missionary, was one of the first people to talk about the PNA Connie. He wrote in 1876 that the DNA sometimes live in constant fear of an imaginary enemy that they think is always after them and that they see everywhere. We all know that this sounds like Bigfoot, even though he doesn't exist. Could these creatures be to blame for the park's horrible deaths and strange disappearances? Does anyone know if any of the other mysterious disappearances in national parks are linked to the fact that large hairy creatures sometimes called Nakmani are still seen in the healthy northern territories? Also, in the middle of the night, footprints that look like those of a person but are much too big and have no shoes on have been found. P-Valley he was maybe one of the first people from outside the PNA to meet them. Connie D&E was John MacLeod. Something threw rocks and branches at his 1831 expedition, and in 1914, Poole Field, who was on the same trip, met the crazy prospector Joe and found Martin Jorgensen's headless body. As they sat around the campfire, the rescue party's dogs went crazy, but they could never find their invisible attacker. A scout eventually killed what he thought was a knock-in that was chasing him. It turned out to be one of his fellow DNA, which was sad. 8 years ago, Jerry Walker and a man named Sam were prospecting in the Nohani Valley. Several Nakmani, who Jerry and Sam described as monkey men, came out of the fog and circled their camp. They called to each other across the campfire with whistles and hoots, forcing the witnesses to get as close to the campfire as they could for safety. When dawn finally came, the men moved, but Connie was still nowhere to be found. The beast got closer than before, which scared Sam and made him pull out his gun. He ran off into the fog after one of the hairy creatures, and shortly after, Jerry heard him screaming from deep in the woods. He had no choice but to sit there and listen. According to the story, Jerry found Sam's body without any flesh on it, which was not a surprise. His head couldn't be found anywhere. People think that the Nagorni is at least as tall as a man. Near Nabani, there is also a much smaller wild man called the New Clock. In 1964 alone, the creature has been seen at least 3 times. Then, in April, in Ahani Butte, a town on the edge of the park, an older Native American man and his friends saw a short, naked, muscled, beardless man-like creature in the woods. When they said hello, it barked and ran into the woods. And in May, a DNA woman was making a basket at dusk when she felt like someone was watching her through the window. She looked up but didn't see anything, so she went back to work. When she looked back a little while later, she saw a face that was just as ugly as the one she had seen a month before. She and 2 of her kids went outside to find the little man, but they couldn't find it anywhere. In the fall of that year, a 14-year-old boy named Jerry saw the creature near his home, which was near a local dump. It was 9 o'clock. When he heard his dog barking outside, Jerry and his father went to comfort their pet. It was very quiet and calm, which was strange. The father turned on his flashlight to find out what was making all this noise. When he pointed the light in the direction of a small sound, he saw a short person staring back at them. The knee clock was covered in hair, which was light brown everywhere but on the top of its head, which was dark black and pointed. It had a stone club in its hands and what looked like a moose skin leather belt around its waist. Strangely, its feet were covered with rubber boots. The witnesses and the knucklehuck stared at each other for a long time, until the dog barked again, sending the animal across the property and into the street. Several people saw it and tried to catch it, but they gave up. Once, it went behind some bushes. Frank Graves, an outdoorsman, saw something in the Honey Valley in 1965 that made his blood run cold. It was huge and had white hair all over it. At first, he thought it was a polar bear that had traveled far south. But as he watched, Graves could see that this thing looked more like a dog or wolf than a bear. Graves had seen a lot of wolves, but this one was 20 times bigger than any other one he had seen. He accidentally shot it with his birdshot, but the animal didn't even flinch, just turning away and lumbering off into the trees. Now, his DNA guide says that Graves had met Wahidullah, the most famous cryptid in the Nabani Valley, who they called Easy. They look like huge wolves, but they never travel in groups. Locals had long thought that Willie and Frank McLeod were the lions because their heads are bigger than wolves, but their ears are smaller, and their tails are thickly muscled like an otter's. Some people think that the Wahidullah is a relic of an animal that didn't go extinct. They think it might be a dire wolf. It is thought that these huge canines went extinct about 26,000 years ago. The biggest dire wolves were about 1.5 feet tall. Wolves in the Honey Valley have a reputation for being very mean. Over the years, there have been a number of attacks. Like other large animals in a Honey, these are often quite big for their species. Because of this, some people think that what Wahidullah's friend saw in the grave was just a big wolf, maybe one with gigantism that was left out of its pack. We probably will never know for sure, but the answer could still be in the Headless Valley. This is just a small taste of the strange things that happen at Nabani National Park Reserve. The Legends of the Nabani Valley by Hammerson Peters is by far the best book on this subject. For every mystery we've solved, we've left a few others unsolved. Peters' work gives a lot of information. The many mysteries that can be found in this remote part of Canada's wilderness. Even though Nabani National Park Reserve has a lot to offer, it is one of the least visited national parks in Canada. This is because it's still hard to get to, but hard to get to doesn't mean impossible. And if you're interested, you can't go there to find out what's going on for yourself. However, if you're determined, and have enough money, you can go to the Honey Valley whenever you want. Just be careful and, Most importantly, don't lose your head. Our next story comes from Kevin. Before he tells us about his own experience with the unknown, he asked that we not use his real name, so we'll just call him Kevin. Kevin worked as a park ranger for about 7 months in the spring and summer of 2015 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. If you don't know much about this park, it's a very big place with many different parts. It's a beautiful park with many different kinds of trees, plants, and animals. And Kevin had worked in one of these smaller sections right near Cades Cove. In fact, it's a very popular place for tourists and hikers, and he worked in the visitor center, which is on a small mountain road. There are many hiking trails in the area, and there are a lot of cabins and campgrounds. With thick trees, shrubs, and bushes, the area can also be quiet and out of the way. There are a lot of small roads that end or lead to small cabins that are hard to find. Kevin says that not many people know about the area's dark side. There are a lot of black bears and other animals there, and it's not uncommon for hikers or tourists to run into large black bears, but most just ignore them. He has also heard stories about strange creatures from other park rangers and visitors. But what he saw this spring evening was not a bear. He still can't figure out what it was. He was working the slowest shift, which is in the evening. It's a good time to sit back, listen to music, and look at the trees and mountains. One of his favorite times to work was in the evening because it was so peaceful and quiet. On this particular night, he had decided to take a walk down one of the smaller roads to clear his mind, listening to the sounds of the nightlife while taking in the fresh air and sights around him. Kevin always felt at peace when he was walking down the road and taking in his surroundings at these times. He was enjoying his peaceful walk when he heard a loud growling sound coming from the bushes next to him. He stops and looks around, but he can't figure out what's making the noise. But what he heard sounded like it could eat him whole, so he slowly moves away from the bushes while keeping an eye on them. As he did this, something flew up from the thicket and landed near a tree. From what he could see, it looked like a giant bat of some kind. But when it got up on the branch, it looked down at him with ugly glowing eyes and a beak. He had never been so filled with evil before. This thing didn't belong here. He says that Kevin says it was about 5 feet tall, had dark brown, matted fur, and had wings that were about 8 to 10 feet long. With its long, curved beak, the face looked like that of a bat or pterosaur, but it was much more evil. It had yellow glowing eyes and a horrible beak for a mouth. It just sat there and looked at him with an evil grin. Kevin, who was surprised and didn't know what to do next. He moves slowly away from the thing while keeping his eyes on it. It seemed like something was teasing it to get closer. He doesn't know how long this situation lasted because time stops when you're in the middle of it. But once he got far enough away from the creature, it just disappeared into the trees and was gone. Once he knows it's safe, he runs back to the visitor center, trying his best to keep a professional attitude, which wasn't easy. His co-workers laugh at him and think he's crazy when he tells them what happened. He still doesn't know what was out there or where it came from. It was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to him, and he will never forget it. Afterward, he has tried to do research, but he hasn't been able to figure out what this could be because there are so many different kinds of bats in Tennessee. But the bat he saw wasn't like any other bat. This thing was easily the size of a small child, maybe 8 or 10 years old. I mean, he's talking about something huge, maybe even as big as a condor, but this wasn't a condor. He said that this thing looked like a pterosaur from hell more than anything else. In fact, the only thing about it that made it look like a bat was how worn and leathery its wings looked. He said that he has seen many bats in his life, so he knows what they look like. But this wasn't like the volcanoes in Hawaii. Kilauea is the name of a national park in the United States. Mauna Loa is one of the world's most active volcanoes. The world's largest shield volcano and the world's tallest mountain are both in the park. Scientists can learn about how the Hawaiian Islands changed over time and do research in the park, which is open to the public. The park has amazing volcanic landscapes, glimpses of rare plants and animals, and a look into the traditional Hawaiian culture that goes along with these sites. Hawaii National Park was created on August 1, 1916. It was later split into this park and Haleakala National Park, which shows how well its natural standards are. In 1980, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park became an International Biosphere Reserve, and in 1987, it became a World Heritage Site. This national park is known not only for its beauty, but also for an area of mystery and superstition. On March 27, 1998, a blue flash of light and a loud thunderous roar lit up the night sky. Hundreds of people in the area called to say what happened, as did a pilot who was in the air at the time. The pilot said that the fireball came within 2 miles of his plane and that he saw the temperature in the area rise dramatically. Others who were there at the same time as the pilot agreed with what he said, and officials later said that the blast was caused by nothing more than a meteor. But that doesn't make sense. Some Hawaiians did not believe it. They said that the explosion that so many people saw was proof that a Hawaiian god had woken up and was angry about what people were doing to the world. In fact, a news report from that day says that this bright light is a rare treat for night owls. People on the island who were awake at 2:41 a.m. today got to see a beautiful light show in the sky. Peter McCotter, who was sleeping and missed it, said, "I wish I'd been awake to see it. It was probably something you'd only see once in your life." But what was it? People who saw it and called the planetarium said they didn't know. McCott said that the light sounds like it could have been a fireball or a bright meteor. On the other hand, it could have been a piece of space trash. He said that it was a piece of a satellite or an old rocket part. It's not easy to say. People did see different colors, though, because it was so bright. Because different metals are used in spacecraft, this is sometimes a sign of space junk. Now, police dispatchers on Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island, as well as the planetarium, security guards, and radio stations, got a lot of calls about the mysterious light on Oahu. The light was described as bluish-purple on the Big Island, where the most calls from all districts came in. The light, according to the police, made the night sky as bright as day. The Coast Guard even said it looked like a big meteor going up into the sky, and while it happens sometimes, meteors, which are pieces of the sun, are common, but it's pretty rare for the average person to see one when he or she is looking up. This is one of many strange things that have happened on the island of Hawaii because tourists have taken rocks from Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and then sent them back. They told the police that the strange things happened when they got home with the rocks. People thought they were cursed because they took rocks from their home. Others have said that when they were exploring the island late at night, they ran into ghosts. As well as seeing a mysterious fog far away. Imagine strange creatures, ghost campsites and encounters with ghosts, and a tree that is said to be able to change the weather. There have been reports of all of these things and more at Crater Lake National Park. In tonight's episode, we'll look into the weird things that have been said to happen here at Crater Lake National Park. Scientists will tell you that Crater Lake was made when Mount Muzame blew up about 8,000 years ago. At the time, Mount Muzame was the largest volcano in the Cascades area. The force of the explosion was so strong that Mount Osama blew its top off and then collapsed, making a huge crater. After 200 years of melting snow and rain, a lake with a depth of more than 2,000 feet was formed. It is the deepest lake in North America, and the 9th deepest lake in the world. Now, find out what the natives say and look at a more colorful story about how Crater Lake got started. Before we move on, I want to say that I'm still sick and getting over a cold, so I'm sorry in advance. So please be patient. The native story about where Crater Lake came from says that the gods made the world in the mountains and also made big tunnels under the mountains. Once they were done, everyone left except one person named Skill. Now, Skill is called the sky god, and most people see it as a good thing. Now, Scale built his house on Mount Shasta while he was there. Scale made people, and he kept a close eye on them and was their best protector. But Scale wasn't the only spirit around. Another spirit named Lau lived under the mountains and in those big tunnels that the gods had made. He has been called the Lord of the Dead. Lau would now go to the upper world and look at all its beauty. During one of these trips, he met a native woman named Aloha who was very pretty. Aloha was the daughter of the Calamity Chief, and people said she was a beautiful woman. Before him, many men had tried to make her their wife but failed. One version of this story says that even Scale tried to marry her. But he was turned down, which was good for Aloha. Scale handled being turned down with grace. The Dark Lord Lau was determined to get Aloha, which was bad for her. So he sent out the lieutenant he trusted the most. Too low of a village has a school. He asked the school to send Aloha his marriage proposal. Aloha then gave school a bunch of expensive gifts and sent him with a group of people to Logius village. That faithful night happened to be a festival night, and Aloha was out enjoying the festivities. There stood a school that people said looked like a wolf and had red eyes. Then, my school told me that my boss Lord Lau plans to marry Aloha. Lord Lau gives these very expensive presents. But the most important thing is that he tells Aloha that she can live forever and that she can live with him under Mountain Melina. He then flicked his fingers, and in a flash of yellow light, all of Aloha's potential suitors vanished, horrified and disgusted. Aloha had bravely said in school, "I don't want to live under a mountain," but then he just disappeared and went back to the mountain. In the meantime, Lola's father called together an emergency tribal council of people who cared about his daughter's situation. He told the tribal council that Loha should leave the village. The elders agreed with the chief, so Loha was told to leave. When the Dark Lord under the mountain heard that school was coming for him, he wasn't too happy. The Dark Lord told school to bring her back to him. But there was a problem at school because Aloha wasn't there and nobody was talking. When the Dark Lord heard this, he told school to tell the village that if they didn't give her up, they would all die. The people in the village said nothing. But by this time, Lord Lau was very angry, so he started walking around under the mountain. As he paced back and forth, the earth began to tremble and shake. He was getting more and more angry, and when his anger reached its peak, it blew the top off of his mountain home. Still angry, Lau climbed out into the open world where there was blue fire and threw hot rocks down on the village. The villa ran away to a nearby lake, and it was there that the medicine men decided that they had to die in order to stop the Dark Lord. As Lord Scale on Mount Shasta looked on, he was moved by this act of kindness. As the medicine men got closer, the mountain Scale flew in front of them and started fighting the Dark Lord Lau. There was a big battle, and in the end, Scale came out on top. After a few days, he made Lau go back into the underworld against his will. He then blocked the entrance to the underworld with pieces of the explosion. This made a crater, which sealed the entrance to the underworld. The Klamath changed the name of the mountain, which used to mean Tall Mountain, and they gave the lake that was formed by the mountain the name Lake Villas, which means a most sacred place. For the next 7,500 years, this place was sacred to the Klamath tribe and kept secret from the rest of the world. I'm telling you this story because, if you take away all the acting, scientists say the same thing happened. At the time of this eruption, the area was inhabited by the Klamath people. Another reason I'm telling you this story is to show that some myths are true or are based on real events. How much is still up for grabs? But it's amazing that this story is still so accurate after 7,700 years. Now, when I first started looking into strange things at Crater Lake, the story's description of school caught my attention. The first thing I saw was a claim that early settlers saw a white deer with red eyes. But as soon as I started looking for the story again so I could talk about it and use it as a possible reference point, I remembered that I had read about his appearances at school. Now, before we move on to the next part, the Klamath also have another story. Now, this story tells how Wizard Island was made, and some people think this might have something to do with the strange things that happen at Crater Lake. I'm guessing that the last battle is what happens after the last story, since it's called the last battle. Now, this story is about Scale and Lau, two gods we met in the last story. And before the battle, this story takes us on a trip down memory lane. The story tells us that the Dark Lord and Skill were not always enemies. Actually, they used to be friends. The story says that Lau came up from the underworld and played with Scale. They would change into different animals and play with each other. Sometimes they were very close friends. Things between them had gotten worse over time to the point where they were now mortal enemies, and one day, Skill and Lau met to fight. This fight was a fight to the death, and of course, the Dark Lord Lau smoked out his opponent Scale. The Dark Lord was very happy and threw a big party to celebrate beating Scale. But this didn't make everyone happy. Scale's followers went to this party, and were able to steal Scale's heart. Then, they were able to bring Scale and Scale back to life. They then faced the Dark Lord again. This time Scale won, and to make sure he won and make sure the Dark Lord would never come back, Skill told his followers to cut him up and get rid of him. His followers did this, and then someone had the bright idea to throw his body parts into the lake so the lake creatures could eat them. But many of the lake creatures were followers of Loud, so they told them they were feeding them the remains of Scale. The creatures in the lake were happy to eat what was left until Skill followers threw the louse head into the lake. When the lake creatures saw this, they were horrified and stopped eating the body parts. The head that was left is said to be what we now call Wizard Island today. From this story, you can learn that Wizard Island is where strange things are said to happen on the lake. Another interesting thing is that the gods were said to be able to change into different animals. This makes me wonder if this could explain some of the strange creatures that have been seen here, or if it was just Kalama's explanation for some strange things they had seen around Crater Lake. For 7,500 years, the lake was a sacred place that no one from the outside world knew about. But that all changed in the 1850s and 1860s, when Crater Lake was discovered and opened to the public. By 1868, the lake was no longer called a sacred place, it was now called Crater Lake. By 1900, the lake was no longer in Klamath territory, it belonged to the US government, which decided to turn this beautiful lake into a national park. An interesting thing to think about, though, is how the Native Americans and the European settlers for Crater Lake. European settlers were amazed by Crater Lake and said that the natives were scared of it and stayed away. A newspaper for organs once printed the following: "There's probably no place of interest in America that makes the average American feel as scared as Crater Lake, and no force has ever been strong enough to make them get close enough to see it. They will agree to take you there for a small fee, but before you reach the mountain, they will leave you to go alone to the wild mind. It is covered in a deep veil of mystery, and all kinds of demons and monsters live there. Many settlers said that the local natives would flat out deny that the lake existed, and if they did admit that it did, they would say that only medicine men and people with strong minds should visit now. A bad tribal elder named Rarely Kirk said that stories about his people being scared were exaggerated. He says that his people didn't come because there was nothing useful for them to do there. There were no fish, and there were tribes nearby that were not friendly. So, he said that the warning to stay away didn't have anything to do with magic. It's possible that this is true. It's also possible that when the natives heard that European settlers had found Greater Lake, they made up a story to scare the settlers away from their own sacred lake. From what we've learned, though, that may not be the case. There was a real fear of Crater Lake, which can be seen from the evidence. Take the following stories from different groups that had contact with the Klamath at some point. This story was written in the year 1896. Around the lake, there were many black, red, and yellow pinnacles and crags that rose up into the sky like a huge amphitheater. Over there, arching caverns pierced the base of a scary cliff, whose frowning walls glared at the rough rock island of the Phantom Ship, which the Klamath people feared beyond words. About the same time, this next story was written. The natives thought for a long time that men could only be punished if they looked at a lake that was holy to the spirits. The story said that if you look at this place, you will die or be sad for a long time. And finally, let's look at this last story that happened during the Hillman's trip. They met a group of natives and asked them what they knew about it. No one would admit there was such a lake. One member of the group said that a medicine man told them that this place was sacred and that only natives who looked at the lake would die. These stories alone show that there was real fear at the time and maybe a good reason to be afraid. The Devil's Den State Park is a 25,100-acre park in Washington County, Arkansas, near West Fork. It has many different things to do. In 1933, the Civilian Conservation Corps started working on the park, and it was finished in 1937. The Devil's Den State Park is in the League Creek Valley of the Boston Mountains. The Boston Mountains are again in the southwestern part of the Ozarks. In fact, it's open for recreation all year long. There are trails for hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding, as well as an 8-acre lake built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, a swimming pool, and cabins. There are many different kinds of camping at Devil's Den State Park, from modern to rustic. At Devil's Den State Park, along the banks of Lee Creek and in the creek itself, you can find all kinds of fossils. In 1946, a family on vacation at Devil's Den State Park lost track of their 8-year-old daughter. The girl was gone all of a sudden. She didn't turn up for 6 days until she was found in a cave about 30 miles from where she went missing. When the little girl was found, the searchers were completely shocked by how calm and unfazed she was. She even came out of the cave to tell everyone. "Here I am." When she was checked out, the little girl showed no signs of injury, even though she was only wearing a bathing suit and had traveled 30 miles in a little over a week. Many people have asked, How did she just vanish and end up so far away? It doesn't make sense. Some people think she ran away from where her family was camping because she was being chased. Some people have said that a Bigfoot-like creature might be to blame, but this can't be proven. No matter how you look at it. During that time, something strange was going on in Devil's Lake Den. During the American Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg took place from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863. It is known as the bloodiest battle in American history. Over the course of those 3 terrible days, 2 big armies fought over the future of the United States, and more than 50,000 people were killed, hurt, or went missing. In fact, the battle caused so much pain and suffering that the wounds from it can still be seen by people today. Gettysburg National Military Park is one of the most haunted places in the world, and it's easy to see why. Every year, hundreds of ghost sightings and experiences are reported. In fact, these sightings have included everything from people thinking they were seeing reenactors to a soldier coming to give someone cartridges and then disappearing. The cartridges were later looked at and were found to be real Civil War cartridges from 1863. In another story, a being made of shoelaces has been known to talk to travelers and help them figure out what they need and where they need to go. People think this ghost is the spirit of a Confederate soldier from Texas who died during the siege. Even though the people in the pictures didn't know who they were when they were taken, war has been photographed since the 1970s. One story tells of a woman who got lost in the rough terrain of a battle site near Little Round Top and had to call for help. She looked around frantically for a way out of the area, and when a man appeared out of nowhere, he pointed to a far place and said, "What you're looking for is over there." Then, there was no sign of him anywhere. Later, the woman told park officials what had happened, and when they asked what the man looked like, she just told them what a Confederate Texas soldier would have looked like at the time. People have also said that a poltergeist called the Ghost walks around the same battlefield. This ghost has been linked to the war. He is said to appear out of nowhere, along with the sounds of gunfire and yelling, and then leave just as quickly, leaving no sign of where he was or who he was. While the Jenny Wade house is often called the most haunted house in America. During the Battle of Gettysburg, it was the only place where a civilian was hurt or killed. Jenny Wade, who lived in the house, was hit by a stray bullet while she was standing in her kitchen baking. Wade, who died on the first day of the fight, is said to be roaming the house with several children. Now, the legend says that when people are on the second floor of the house, they may or may not hear loud bangs and the voice of a child. They may also feel sudden rushes of cold air on their faces. Some people have even said that they could feel the small children's arms around their legs as they walked. The Sachs-covered bridge, which is a beautiful reminder of a bygone time in Pennsylvania, may be one of the most haunted places in all of Gettysburg. Now, local legend says that the bridge that the fleeing Confederate army crossed was also where 3 deserters from the army were publicly hanged. People who have been to the bridge say they have seen ghosts, smelled cigar smoke, heard voices, and felt a touch when no one else was around. In addition, it has also been reported that there are spirits that continue to inhabit the Gettysburg Hotel, which served as a hospital during the Civil War. Rachel, who was a nurse during the terrible Battle of Gettysburg, has been known to wander around the rooms, look through guest drawers and luggage, and wheel carts around the lodge with no care in the world. A Union soldier who died in the hospital is also often seen walking around the hotel. During the battle, Gettysburg College also served as a field hospital for both sides. This gave the college a reputation for being haunted by ghosts for years afterward. The scariest of these stories can be traced back to the early 1900s, when college employees would enter an elevator, push the button for the floor they wanted, and then wait for the elevator to arrive. On the other hand, the elevator had a different plan. It took them straight down to the basement. When the elevator doors opened, these women saw a horrible Civil War operating room where doctors were trying to save the lives of injured and dying soldiers. Suddenly, the elevator started to move them up to a higher floor. As a ghostly doctor approached them from the room, two employees went back to the basement a few minutes later with the help of a security guard. When they got there, they found nothing strange. No one seems to know why strange things keep happening at Gettysburg, but it looks like the ghosts of the Confederate and Union armies may have never left the battlefield. Grand Canyon National Park is one of the most popular and well-known state parks in the US, if not the whole world. This national park is in the northwest corner of Arizona. It is the 15th national park in the United States. It was founded in 1872. The Grand Canyon, a gorge made by the Colorado River, is the park's most famous feature and is sometimes called one of the 7 natural wonders of the modern world. It is the second most visited national park in the United States, after the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Every year, more than 6 million people come to the park for fun. The park includes more than 1 million acres of land in Mojave County that is not part of any town. The United Nations and other educational, scientific, and cultural groups said that this national park is a World Heritage Site. In 1979, the park was known for its amazing and beautiful views as well as the mysteries and stories that surrounded the Hopi. At the time, one of the tribes that lived in the area believed that a god named Masawu, which means skeleton man, was the spirit of death, earth god, a gatekeeper to the fifth world, and the keeper of fire in the ancient world. In addition, he was in charge of the upper world, sometimes called the fourth world. He was there when good people ran away from the bad things in the third world to find the promise in the fourth world. It is shown to be wearing a scary mask. Sawu was either described as a beautiful bejeweled man behind his mask or as a bloodthirsty, scary creature behind the mask. This is another example of how different people can believe different things. He also has a lot of good qualities. And one story says that Masawu helped the Hopi people settle in or near IB, and gave them control over the area. He also told them to keep an eye out for the Ohana, who were also called the Lost White Brother. There is a story that the Masai lived in the canyon, and that he is the reason why people have seen strange lights or heard the sounds of rocks being knocked together at night. People say that if you see or hear these things, the Death Keeper is coming to get you. Many people think this tribe is weird or old, but others have said that they felt sick and worried after seeing the same things. The place where massages are said to take place is in a fairly flat part of the park. Still, there have been many accidents there. The Olympic National Park is in the great state of Washington. It is a national park of the United States that is set aside for conservation and fun. The park is made up of 4 different types of land: the coast of the Pacific Ocean, the alpine areas, the temperate and rainforest areas on the west side, and the forest on the east side, which is drier. In the park, there are 3 different kinds of ecosystems: a subalpine forest and a wildflower meadow, a temperate forest, and the rough Pacific coast. President Theodore Roosevelt set up the Mount Olympus National Monument on March 2, 1909. It is the oldest national monument in the United States. Now, Congress and President Franklin D. Roosevelt officially turned the monument into a national park on June 29, 1938. In 1976, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization made Olympic National Park an international biosphere reserve. As part of the Olympic wilderness, UNESCO named it a World Heritage Site in 1981. In 1988, Congress made 95% of the park a national park, which is about 1,300 square miles. In 2017, the Olympic Wilderness was changed to the Daniel J. Evans Wilderness to honor the former governor and U.S. Senator Daniel J. Evans. Evans was one of the people who helped pass the bill in 1988 that made the state's wilderness areas possible. It is the largest wilderness area in the state in terms of land area. In late January 2018, 100 trees in the forest were mysteriously and forcibly pulled out of the ground and knocked over. Many experts thought it was because of a strong windstorm or other weather event, but weather records showed that nothing that strong had happened during this time. And to make things even stranger, the night before, many people who had been to the area said they had heard loud rumblings in the forest. Based on this information, it was thought that maybe there had been an earthquake or a lance, even though there was no evidence to back it up. Some trees were completely uprooted and thrown on their sides, while others were just tipped, leaning, and some were even broken. No one knows for sure why these trees fell. Even though there have been some ideas, some people think it might have been a big animal or group of animals. Some people think it could have been done by aliens or their spaceships, but the mystery hasn't been solved yet. Yosemite National Park is in California. To the southeast of the park is the Sierra National Forest, and to the northwest is the Pacific Ocean. The National Park Service runs the park, which is almost 760,000 acres and spread out over 4 counties. It is known for its beautiful granite cliffs, waterfalls, clear streams, huge sequoia groves, lakes, mountains, meadows, glaciers, and ecological diversity. Almost the whole park is a huge wilderness, and Yosemite is one of the Sierra Nevada's biggest and least broken up habitat blocks. It is home to a huge variety of plants and animals. In fact, the Sierra Nevadas are home to about half of California's 7,000 plant species. On the evening of September 19, 2000, a disc-shaped unidentified flying object was seen in the sky over this beautiful part of the United States. People told many different stories about what happened, and some even got video of this UFO. A short time later, the object went away, and a US Air Force plane was seen in the area, even though it had been seen circling the area where the UFO had been seen several times. The pilots couldn't figure out what so many people had seen and recorded on video. Take a look at what we think are some of the best UFO videos ever taken. In September 2002, this was one of many things that happened in Yosemite. Many people who went to the park said they saw a strange light flying and hovering in the night sky. Many experts have written off the idea of aliens and UFOs, saying that what people see are most likely optical illusions or even meteors streaking through the night sky. To date, many people think that these events haven't been properly looked into, so they hold on to the idea that aliens came to Yosemite. Valley of Death National Park is east of the Sierra Nevadas and connects California and Nevada. It protects a part of the Mojave Desert, with its salt flats, sand dunes, badlands, valley canyons, and mountains, which are on the border between the dry Great Basin and Mojave Deserts. The park is the largest in the southern United States. It is also the hottest, driest, and lowest place in the country. Badwater Basin is the lowest point in North America and the second lowest point in the Western Hemisphere. More than 93% of the park has been set aside as a wilderness area. Several Native American tribes have lived in the area since as early as 7000 BC. The Tembisa, who moved between winter camps in the valleys and summer grounds in the highlands around 1000 AD, are the most recent. Even though only one person died there, the valley got its name from a group of European Americans who got stuck there in 1849 while looking for a shortcut to California's gold fields. The area was so big and empty that they named it Death Valley. Death Valley is known as a place where people lost their way and went missing on a very hot day in July 1996, when the temperature was almost 120 F. Death Valley lost track of 4 German tourists. The last place they were seen was in a small ghost town, where they both signed a visitor's book and wrote, "We're going through the past." When the tourists missed their flight home, German authorities were notified, and on August 14, the Germans were officially reported missing. On October 23, 3 flat tires were found on the van they had rented. There was nothing important in the car, no wallets, no passports, or anything else of note. Many people who were following the story thought that the Germans might have been kidnapped. For more than 20 years, nothing important happened in the investigation until 2009, when human bones were found in Death Valley. Even though the bodies were never formally named. Local authorities involved in the case said they were pretty sure that the bones belonged to the missing Germans from 1996. The last news about the case was in 2009, and it is still a mystery that has not been solved. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is a national park in the southeast of the United States. It is in Tennessee and North Carolina. This park includes the Great Smoky Mountain Ridge Line, which is part of the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are part of the large Appalachian Mountains. The park's center is split by the line between the two states, which runs from Georgia to Maine from northeast to southwest. The Appalachian Trail goes right through the middle of the park. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most visited national park in the United States, with over 500,000 acres and nearly 14 million visitors every year. Is this news to anyone? The park also protects a number of old buildings that were built by the first European American settlers who lived in the area. In 1934, the United States Congress and President Franklin D. Roosevelt set up the park. He gave it to the church in the 1940s. This was also the first time the government paid for land and other costs in a national park. While other parks were paid for entirely by the state or private donations, this national park is the center of a thriving tourism industry in this part of Tennessee that borders the park. A lot of people have gone missing in the park over the years, and one of the most well-known cases was that of Dennis Martin. Dennis and his family went hiking in the Smoky Mountains in 1969. Dennis was 6 years old at the time, and he and his 3 brothers planned to scare their parents by hiding and then jumping out as they walked by. As the parents walked by and were fooled by their kids' joke, Dennis went one way to hide and his brothers went another. Only the 3 brothers came out. The family couldn't find Dennis anywhere. They started looking for the boy quickly and calling his name, but they couldn't find him. Soon, a whole search party was called in to help find the boy. No one ever found Dennis. Many people think he was taken by someone or even by a wild animal. But there hasn't been any proof to back up these ideas. Dennis had disappeared and left no sign of what had happened to him. No one knows what happened to poor Dennis Martin over 50 years ago, and they still don't know. Even though most authorities think he is dead, he is just one of many people who have gone missing in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The first strange thing that stood out to me was a tree called the Old Man. This is probably the best piece of evidence that there might be something really weird going on at Crater Lake. The Old Man is a 30-foot hemlock tree that floats upright in Crater Lake, with only about 3 feet. Carbon dating shows that the tree is more than 450 years old. A geologist named Joseph Diller was the first person to see it in 1896. There are many strange and odd things about this tree. The first fact is that the tree looks like it is rooted into the lake bed below. But it moves across the lake. In 1938, someone hired a group to find out how far this tree moves. From July to October, this tree moved around the lake a total of 62.7 miles, according to the measurements. On August 6, it moved a whopping 3.8 miles, which is a lot. Some people have said that the tree is going around the lake because of the wind. People have noticed that the Old Man often walks in the opposite direction of the wind. The fact that this tree has been floating for so long has also confused scientists. I couldn't find a clear answer about how long it usually takes, but what usually happens is that a tree that is floating on a body of water soaks up water and sinks over time. The process usually takes a lot less time than 120 years, and for all we know, the Old Man could have been in the lake longer than that. Another strange thing about the old man is that it is floating in an upright position, which is also strange. Scientists have measured the tree, and according to their calculations, a tree the size of the old man should be floating horizontal, not vertical. This has caused scientists to try and develop a hypothesis to explain the abnormal behavior. One theory is that the rocks were stuck to the roots of the tree when it fell into the lake. This is thought to have caused the tree to stand up straight. However, there's no evidence to suggest that this is the case because scientists don't have a definitive answer on why the old man floats the way it does. Some people are saying that the old man goes against what we know about physics. The old man is strange for more reasons than just where it came from and how it moves. Some people say that it can change the weather all around it. This is how the story goes, and it's been told a lot of times. In the year 1988, a group of scientists planned to explore the lake from a submarine. They thought the old man was a safety risk and decided it would be best to camp on Wizard Island's eastern shore. People say that the crew hadn't even tied the rope around the log yet. When out of nowhere, the sky got dark, the lake water got rough, and a bad storm started to move in. The crew started to get scared, so they untied the tree. The crazy part is that as soon as the rope was taken away, the sky cleared up. The wind stopped, and the weather went back to how it was before they tied the rope to the old man. Beautiful. As the video has already said, Wizard Island is linked to the Dark Lord Lao, which is an interesting fact. So maybe there really is something going on. Whether it would hold a dark energy or something that couldn't be explained, maybe something supernatural. I tried to find proof that this really happened, but I couldn't find any first-hand accounts. But I did find out that there was a submarine expedition in 1988, and several park rangers at Crater Lake think this story is true. So much so that people can't jump on the old man and pose for pictures anymore. If what people say is true, Sasquatch lives at Crater Lake, too. As bad as it is in the world today. You shouldn't believe anyone who says they've seen this hairy creature walking around since then. The famous video was shot by Roger Patterson in 1967. The cryptid has been seen all over North America, but some scientists are quick to say that it was just a bear or some other strange animal that was misidentified. Skeptics say it's a person in a suit, even though it makes sense when you think about it. It seems that people really do dress up in Bigfoot costumes. And the show 1000 Ways to Die has a story about someone who wore a Sasquatch costume and had a terrible time. The man is called Luke Wiggins on the show, which is probably not his real name since the show says it changes the names of the dead. Anyway, Wiggins lived near a park, and he got tired of seeing runners on the trails near his house. So one day, he thought it would be a good idea to dress up as a Sasquatch and scare the runners. This went on for a while, but it wasn't long before the park rangers started hearing stories about Sasquatch roaming the park. One ranger went out with a dart gun and saw a Sasquatch scaring an innocent jogger. The park ranger opened fire and hit the hairy creature, but it turned out to be a man in a Sasquatch costume. His tranquilizer dart killed the man. And Randy Lee Tenley is in yet another story about a Bigfoot impersonator who did something wrong. In 2012, Randy put on a ghillie suit and tried to stop a remote Montana highway. Unfortunately, he was hit by a car and then run over by a second car. Randy's friends said that he was trying to make people think they saw a Sasquatch. People often don't believe reports of Sasquatch sightings because of stories like these, and the fact that Sasquatch is so common in pop culture makes it harder to take a supposed sighting seriously. But thousands of people say they have seen this hairy cryptid, and they are very sure it exists. So, the million-dollar question is there any proof that Sasquatch exists? You could probably argue about this all day. But that's a rabbit hole, my friends. For a totally different video. Many native tribes in the western United States have strange stories about tall, hairy wild men. For example, on the Thule Indian Reservation, there is a pictograph that is said to show a giant hairy biped and is thought to be over 1,000 years old. Not only are there weird carvings and drawings, but there are also a lot of story from the past. There are things that tend to show that Sasquatch is real. Take the story of Rachel Plummer. In 1836, she was captured by a Comanche raiding party and taken across the prairie for the next 2 years. When she was finally freed, she wrote about her adventures when she got back home. She talked about the animals and plants that lived on the prairie. She does, however, talk about a strange animal that is called a man-tiger in English. The Comanche had seen this creature more than once in the mountains. It was said to look like a man but have a lot of hair and be almost 9 feet tall. Then there's Buffalo Bill, whose real name was William Cody. He says some Pawnee Indians showed him a huge thigh bone. They said that this bone came from a race of giants who looked like people. But they don't exist anymore because a flood wiped them out a long time ago. However, other great frontiersmen tell stories that might be about Sasquatch. In his book The Wilderness Hunter, President Theodore Roosevelt wrote about a meeting he had with an old mountain hunter named Bowman. Daniel Boone said that he had killed a 10-foot giant that he called a Yahoo. The story goes that while he was out, he met someone. Bowman? Then Bowman stopped Roosevelt, and asked him if he had heard his story about meeting a big animal. Roosevelt said no, so Bowman told him a story about how he and his partner were looking for beaver. When they went into a cave, a tall, hairy beast attacked them. When Bowman's partner got hurt, Bowman ran away and left his partner there to die. He then moved back to Oregon. A famous meeting with a Sasquatch is said to have happened in 1924. 5 gold prospectors were looking for gold near Mount St. Helens, and one of them met a big hairy creature. Fred was a prospector. Beck said he shot the beast, and that night, while Beck and the other 4 miners were sleeping in their cabin, the cabin was attacked in full force. The thing came back, but this time it was with its friends and family, and they started throwing rocks and boulders at the miners. Beck passed out after a bull was thrown through the roof at him, and these animals tried to break down the door. They kept attacking until the sun came up, and when it did, these creatures ran back into the forest. The Forest Service sent several rangers to the area to find out where they came from, but they didn't find any signs of these creatures. It's hard to believe these stories because they sound too good to be true. In fact, a lot of people probably think that these stories are just made up or tall tales. I think, though, that they might have some truth to them. Now, going back to Crater Lake, the Calamity Indians, our favorite native tribe, have old stories about a huge creature. In fact, the show Finding Bigfoot did go to the Calamar, and do an episode about the whole area. The video does a pretty good job of explaining why some people think this creature is bad. In a strange twist, the show didn't find Bigfoot. Instead, they found something else, which brings us to the next weird thing that happens at Crater Lake: strange lights and ghost campfires. The show Finding Bigfoot was at the AMC Mountain, which is about 35 miles east of Crater Lake. While they were out filming, some of the crew saw an odd light in the distance one night. At first, they thought it was a headlamp, but as they watched, they became sure it was a ball or orb of light floating through the forest. This is interesting because many of the sacred places of the native peoples of the Americas are linked to strange lights. For example, these same orbs are often seen on Brown Mountain in North Carolina. Native Americans see these lights as the spirits of dead people. Native Americans are not the only ones who see these lights, though. People say that on many nights, they see what look like campfires on Wizard Island. A park ranger tells the following story about the time she saw one of these ghostly campfires. One night, she saw these campfires and knew that Wizard Island had an illegal camp set up there. So, she sneaked onto the island and counted 10 illegal campers around the campfire. Then she called for help on the radio. She meets up with her partner, and the two of them head in to catch the illegal campers. But when they got there were neither campers nor a campfire, and there was no sign that either had been there at the same time as the lights. People say that UFOs and other strange paranormal things happen in the park a lot. They say that a lot of the time, strange lights either come out of the lake or go down into it. This is interesting to me because, if you've been paying attention to the reports coming out of the Navy about their encounters with UFOs or APS, as they call them, you'll know that these things are real. They say the same thing about what they did. One famous sighting at Crater Lake happened in 1997. People saw 3 discs racing across the lake, and later that day, they heard a loud sonic boom that was so loud that it set off their car alarms. Supernatural beings, giant cryptids, and space aliens aren't the only strange things about Crater Lake. In fact, stories about strange deaths and disappearances in the park are still told today. In fact, one of them is called a suicide by cop. Before I talk about this meeting, I want to talk about the very first story about the lake. If you remember, when they talked about the lake's mythology and how the native people were afraid of it, they said that only medicine men and people with strong minds should ever go there. They say that's because the lake has the power to make you feel calm. If a person stares too long, they will go into a trance-like state that will kill them. Could this be what happened to so many people who were unlucky? The first scary and creepy story about this happened in 1947 and was called A Sudden Death. Mr. Cornelius was in the park when all of a sudden, as if in a trance, he handed his wife his wallet and keys and walked toward the lake. He tried to jump into the lake, but instead he slid to the edge of the water and broke his ankle. But he got up, and was sure he was going to jump in the lake. He limped out to the lake, fell into the water, and drowned. No one knows why this happened or what made him do what he did. In 1944, there was another strange story about 2 US military planes that were flying together over the lake. The pilot of one of the planes was shocked when he looked over. The plane of his partner could not be found anywhere. The plane of his partner had just vanished. Even stranger is that there was no call for help and no sign that anything was wrong. Recovery efforts showed that the plane had crashed into the lake, but there were no clear signs of how or why this happened. The creepiest story happened in 1974, when a nature photographer named Charles McCall was visiting the park. He would never leave the park, which was the only problem. This is the official story about Charles. He wanted to take pictures of nature and was from Virginia. He was taking pictures all across the country and ended up near Crater Lake in Oregon. He was staying at a friend's house. In January, he went to a place called Crater Lake and told his friend that if he didn't come back by February 1st, he should be reported missing. His friend noticed, and thought it was strange because he didn't look like he was ready for the winter weather at Crater Lake at the time. But until February 1st, he didn't think about it at all. So, the police were looking into it, and the last time anyone saw it was on January 30th. A park logger said that he drove this photographer to the Crater Lake Park entrance. He said that his van couldn't move in the snow because it was too heavy. Anyone can guess what happened next. 2 years later, a backpack was found by hikers in a remote canyon. They gave it to the police, and it was found to be his. When the area was searched, a body was found, but it was in the strangest shape. The body was found about 12 miles from where he was last seen camping. Even stranger, the area is covered in deep snow in January, which makes the place even stranger. In fact, there is so much snow that it is hard for skiers and snowmobilers to get around. But it looked like my cooler hiked to this spot, and what was even stranger was that he seemed to be only partly dressed. Even stranger was how his body was when it was found. There were only a few bones left. At the time, the authorities are said to have said that it looked like he just disappeared. His death is said to have been an accident. No matter what other people think, there may be more to the story. Maybe he was the victim of foul play or saw one of the many strange things that have been reported at Crater Lake. I don't think people's imaginations and tall tales can explain all this weirdness. In fact, I think that whatever is going on in Crater Lake has been going on for a long time, and that the Kalamar tribe saw this strangeness, which gave them ideas for their colorful myths about Crater Lake. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Is Crater Lake really a place where strange things happen, and there might be doors to other worlds? Or is it all just a bunch of tricks, tall tales, and lies to a 64-year-old on February 14, 2020? Gail Stewart disappeared for no clear reason. She went for a walk near her home in Reno, Nevada, and was reported missing later, when she never went back home. After family and friends got in touch with the police, authorities, friends, and family then went on a search. They looked all over the Coughlin Ranch, Alum Creek, and Truckee River, hoping to find some sign that Gail Stewart had ever been there. Not at all. After the group had spread out beyond the original search grid, one of the people in one of the search groups happened to look over a nearby cliff and saw Stewart hanging from a tree. Luckily, she was found and saved. But by the time they got to her, she wasn't moving and was showing signs of being too cold. She was also missing one shoe, and her friends, family, and the people helping with the search didn't know what she had been up to. It must have been a crazy one because she only had one shoe and no one knew what happened to the other one. Authorities, her friends and family, and the people who were looking for her are all confused about how she got into this situation and why her knees, legs, and feet looked so bad. Luckily, after she was taken to a hospital and her injuries were treated and checked out, she was released, happy to be alive and ready to go home to see her friends and family. Call it a coincidence or call it fate. But the same 64-year-old woman, Gail Stewart, went missing again a month later, on March 14, 2022, when she left her home in Reno, Nevada, to take pictures of the Hoover Dam, which is more than 400 miles away. She just wanted to take some pictures of nature and the area around her because the Hoover Dam recreation area is so beautiful and breathtaking. In fact, it's so beautiful that it's a very popular tourist spot. Every year, almost 7.5 million people visit the same park, which is huge and covers more than 150 million acres. It would make it almost impossible to look for things. Strangely, after the police and park rangers told Stewart she was missing, they started looking for her and found her car still in the parking lot with her cell phone and purse still inside. Which seemed very strange at first. Could she have gone to the recreation area on her own and then been hurt or killed there? Did she trip and fall? Did she go through a strange change in time? Was he with her? How did this woman just miss her chance? Really disappeared without a trace. Stuart's son Matthew wrote on his Facebook page, "Mom, wherever you are," after Stuart had left no clues. "I hope you're not in pain and that you've found peace." He was clearly upset and traumatized by the disappearance of his own mother. A family who is sad and doesn't know what happened to their loved ones because they don't know what happened or why. People go missing around national parks all over the country all the time, and the same thing happens every time. And it's not getting any better, folks. People just vanish without a trace and don't leave anything behind. Could Gail Stewart have been just another one of them? Or was she taken by someone, or did something even worse happen to her? In the American Ethnology Report of 1898, there is a story about a boy who was 10 years old and saw something very strange, possibly a fae or fairy. The story is about a 10-year-old boy who went missing but was later found, even though his disappearance was very strange. He was not hurt when he went missing, which was lucky. The boy's name was Wofford, and after practicing archery for a while, he thought, "Hey, I could go fishing around here and bring home a couple of good fish for my mom to cook for supper." He was excited. He runs down to the river and starts putting stones in the water to try to catch some fish. When out of nowhere, this mysterious, kind, gentle stranger comes out of the woods and starts talking to the boy, saying, "You look tired, you look hungry. Are you okay? Do you need any help?" Even though this stranger coming out of nowhere scared Wofford, his way of being, his personality, and the way he moved were all calm, persuasive, and very gentle. And this is when he offered the boy invited him back to his house for a great dinner, dessert, and lots of laughter and fun. When you're 10, you're a lot more trusting. So the boy just agreed that it was a good idea. Even though this person seemed to appear out of nowhere, it was still strange. Even though this stranger seemed kind and calm, it didn't scare the boy too much. So, the boy and the strange man decided to go for a short walk in the woods, where they found this beautiful house. Wofford would talk about the house and how it looked in the future. It was beautiful, kept very well, and had a lot of light. It didn't feel creepy or strange at all. In fact, it was so warm and welcoming that as soon as Wofford walked into the house, he lost any tension, nervousness, or fear he had. He could also smell delicious food desserts as soon as he walked in. People were laughing, giggling, and singing. It was great to be there. So, Wofford sat down and ate his food, which was both filling and tasty. Mind you, had some really good desserts, and he started to laugh and play with everyone else. During this time, he was enjoying social hour, and he saw one of his neighbors there with him. This made it clear to him that he was right. Okay, well, he's here, so I guess I'm safe. And now I could really let down my guard. After playing and having fun for a while, he got tired and went to sleep for the night. When he woke up in the morning, he told the strange man who had brought him to the house that he had fallen asleep. "I gotta get home. I'm sure my family is freaking out because they are so worried about me." So, the man smiled at him and led him out of the house along a small dirt path. To the left was a cornfield, and to the right was an apple orchard. I want to say again how beautiful and peaceful the house and the land around it were. It was like a small fantasy world in the middle of the woods. So, this man talks to the boy and leads him to the end of the path. At the end of the path, he points in a certain direction and says, "If you go over this hill, which was a ridge and a river, you'll end up back at your house." So, when the boy turned around to say goodbye to the stranger for the last time, he was gone. And here's where things get even stranger. Not only did this mysterious kind stranger disappear, but the landscape around him also changed. This beautiful apple orchard and this cornfield were no longer there. All around him was a deep, thick forest. In fact, the path that had been used wasn't there anymore. So, the boys are kind of freaking out right now, wondering what just happened and where they are. And he was lucky enough to find his way back to where he had heard people calling his name. It turned out that it was his friends and family, who had been looking for him since the night before, when they found him. They were happy to hug and kiss their son and ask him what had happened and where he had been. And he said in a very calm voice, "I met this strange man in the woods. I went to this house with him. I had tasty food and dessert, and my neighbor was there. However, the same neighbor who was supposed to be at the house was actually one of the family members looking for him. Now, this neighbor was looking at this kid as Wofford was talking. He said, 'Yeah, I saw you at the dinner party last night. You were laughing and having a good time.' The neighbor gives him a strange look and says, 'No, I've been looking for you all night and all morning. Where did you go?' Many superstitious or paranormal people think that Wofford's tale is a perfect example of the fae or fairy people because it can't be explained. But that is, of course, just a guess. Some people think that this was just a case of an inche or some other kind of shapeshifter, but they are usually associated with darkness, danger, and evil. So for it to show kindness, and for what reason, and if that truly was the case, then why did it or he take him back to his house, feed him, give him food, give him comfort, and then just allow him to leave? It really didn't make sense. So, if you want to look at it from a paranormal point of view, it could very well be the fae. If you want to look at it in a realistic way, he could very well be making it up. But if he was making it up, how would we know where he was all night and day, and why he would try to lie that his neighbor was somewhere he wasn't? The boys seemed to be telling the truth and were sure that this had happened. How could we think this is a logical thing to happen if we really thought about it? Even though the story seems very interesting at first. It's hard to say for sure what this might have been. The next story comes from an anonymous submitter who said they saw a man come running out of the woods onto the road holding their bloody shoulder and chest and then disappear. They don't know if it was a ghost, an apparition, a real person, or something else. In the email, the man said that his name was Jonathan and that he and his wife were going to Yosemite National Park one night. Now, he didn't say exactly where in the park they were, but he did say that it was evening and that the sun had set low enough that it wasn't completely dark yet, but visibility was much worse than usual. From the emails, it sounds like Jonathan and his wife were trying to find the camping spot they had already reserved and where they were going to stay for at least 4 or 5 days. And as they drive through the area, they come to a part where there are only trees on both sides of the road. This is common in national parks and camping areas, and as the road curves, they see a man in what look like black pants and a blue button-up shirt run out into the road in front of the car, holding his left shoulder and covered in blood. The man looked like he was completely freaked out and scared. But everything happened so quickly that when the man ran out in front of Jonathan's car, Jonathan had to slam on the brakes and drive right through him, or so he said. He then stopped the car and put it in park because he thought he had run over Jonathan. He gets out of the car and uses his phone as a flashlight, but he can't see anything. In fact, there wasn't a single person there who was scared, confused, and baffled by this. He runs back to the car and asks his wife, "Did you see what I just saw?" She says, "Yes, I did," and is just as scared as Jonathan. "Did we hit him like what happened?" But it looked like there was no sign of the strange man who ran out in front of the car. Jonathan was very upset by this sighting, and he went on to say that neither he, his family, nor his wife have ever hallucinated, taken drugs that changed their minds, smoked weed, or drank alcohol. In fact, he saw this man so clearly that he can still remember what he looked like. He had short, curly black hair, a clean-shaven face, a bigger than average nose, and was pale and covered in sweat. He thought the man was running away from something or someone because he remembered how hard the man was gripping his chest. He thought the man had been shot or attacked and was trying to get help. But as soon as this man ran out in front of Jonathan's car, he turned to see Jonathan's headlights go right through him, and he was gone. So Jonathan wonders if this was a ghost or maybe a dead person who was showing up again and again to relive its past. Or was this just a random hallucination that he and his wife both saw? Whatever the case, it is, to say the least, disturbing. If you liked today's episode, hit the like button and leave a comment below. Tell me what you think and how you feel. And as always, guys, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button and keep your notifications on, as YouTube will let you know every time or at least a great new video comes out. I love you all. Don't close your minds, and I'll see you in the next video.